Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Dauphinais, and today I am joined by a dear friend and mentor and colleague, Professor Emeritus at Ave Maria University, Dr. William Riordan. And Dr. Riordan, just welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Michael. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, and Dr. Riordan was really probably one of the earliest founding members of what became Ave Maria University.
Yes.
Before there was Ave Maria College in Michigan, there was Ave Maria Institute.
Yes.
And I believe you began teaching with the Institute, Ave Maria Institute, in 1998.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. 2 years before it became a college in 2000, and several years before Ave Maria University began in Florida in 2003. Right. And so just so pleased to have you on the show. I know many of our listeners find the history of Ave Maria just of interest. Either, some of them have participated in it or not. And I just wanted to get a chance to speak with you a little bit about some of those early days of the founding of the university, some of your involvement with it. And one of the things I really want to talk a little bit about is how you feel like, God prepared you intellectually, theologically, to join Ave Maria and to, help it become, something that was kind of unique, something that would make a genuine contribution to not only the recovery of theological education, but really to the recovery of education.
Yes.
There was such a sense that many people find somehow education not as, I don't know how to put it, not as consoling, not as educating almost as it ought to be. We saw this sometimes with maybe Catholic universities that were not fully embracing their Catholic identity, other universities that have kind of given up the notion that there is ultimately one truth, right?
Yes.
That kind of centers the university. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about what was the Institute like when you showed up in 1998?
I was the fourth member of the full-time faculty hired. And it was a very small group of students, as you mentioned earlier. They were very ardent Catholics, raised in good families, most of them. And we made an important move early on. We hired a man named Dr. Matt Levering, and he was a key figure in, I think, the way that the university later developed and the theology graduate program, along with the whole undergraduate as well. And then the way in which the liberal arts were being integrated in such a way that each science, let's say what we basically had as the core was a classic language, usually Latin, maybe some Greek, physical sciences, literature, history, philosophy, as all those sciences that are forms of knowledge that are available to the natural human reason, and then the divine science, theology. The professors were exceedingly emphasizing the integration of these fields of study, each with their own range, as Pope John Paul II in Ex Corde Ecclesiae delineates, and also Newman in his idea of the university, that that these different ways of seeing God's creation from these different perspectives is so integrating, and so each discipline then not only has its own range, but also is seen together with the others, and there's not that isolation of specialization.
So it's interesting. At most schools, right, the school and the curriculum has been around for forever, or for, not forever, but for a long time before faculty or students show up.
Yes.
So you were at that time, right, really just a group of faculty members.
Yes.
Four. I think when I showed up in 2001, maybe 13 or a dozen. So what was it like in a way to have a group of faculty sitting around a table developing a curriculum, in a way developing what you judged was like that was worthy of students,
yes,
and
it
necessary.
It was exciting, and with Matt, Dr. Levering there, we soon brought you in. You have studied together with Matthew under Father Lamb. The excitement with not only the professors but the students who would comment to us, well, I was over in literature, I was reading Dante, but now I'm in theology, I'm studying Aquinas, and I see the way in which these form together, and there's such a richness. There's a way in which the liberal arts really doesn't make it's liberating, liber. That's the key word in Latin there, because it frees us from that darkness of sin and of ignorance in which we're born, that obscuring of mind, that weakening of the will, that disorder in the passions. It helps to bring an integrated view of creation and its creator. And it's very, I think, in some ways consoling, as you're mentioning. It can be consoling and builds confidence. And it prepares a person, as Father Fessio would always say when he joined the faculty, it prepares a person for professional work in any field. We have people who went through the corps and went on to law or in carpentry or finance, whatever. So it's a very good foundation.
What would you say to some who might object that the kind of the role of theology somehow, obscures the other disciplines, or that everything just gets collapsed into theology. And so, students aren't really getting a university education.
I think that would be very mistaken. We had students who were training in biology or in some field, actually specializing in history, medieval or modern, philosophy, reading everyone from Plato and Aristotle up through Kant and Hume and the others. It was so expansive, not being bleached out by theology at all. Rather, theology as, in some ways, a capstone and an illuminating, englobing vision, which integrates and highlights all the rest, brings them out in their full color range and richness. No, it doesn't overwhelm the others.
Right, yeah, I think there's that image that some people have used with respect to grace and nature, that if you have a stained glass window, right, it has all of the colors and beauty within it, but it's when light illumines it that you see it
much more brilliantly.
And and perhaps in some ways it seems that without theology, when the universities began to reject many of universities that were founded by Christian congregations or by the Catholic Church, rejected that, that the different parts, in a way, began to lose their connection.
Splintering.
And I think it's, one of the things you might have found this when you were hiring faculty, is that some faculty were very well trained in one area, but were not sure about how that their discipline would be connected to the rest of studies. And I always thought it was kind of, the irony is that we expect the students to learn it all. So then the faculty also ought to have some sense for not only their own discipline, but how their discipline fits within the whole. And I think one of the things that can actually do is it actually prevents us from thinking that our discipline is the only way of viewing the world.
Right, exactly.
Right? I mean, there's something, right, if you, there's the joke, right, a man with a hammer sees everything as a nail, right? And it's good in a way for the biologist to see everything in terms of biology, or the, the philosopher to see everything in terms of philosophy, or, finance or economics, whatever it is, literature. And yet, we also have to remember that the whole is much greater than our ability to see it, right? Even theology does not see all of the natural world in its splendor qua theology, right? As revealed theology, it kind of needs, in a way, other studies of grammar, right?
Yes.
Of
Yes.
studies of history,
Yes.
Studies of
Philosophy and so on.
philosophy,
Yeah, sure.
astronomy, all these different
Yeah.
modes.
And it can
So-
integrate these and raise them up into the revealed wisdom of God, which, as Aquinas says in question 1, is God's knowledge of himself concerning himself alone and then communicated to others for their beatitude. It's God's knowledge sibi, soli, de se ipso. This is question 1, article 6. And Aquinas also says that theology is not in need of these other sciences, but the other sciences help to better manifest to us what has been revealed to us. So the extraordinary use of philosophy by Aquinas is so important within sacred doctrine, within that all-encompassing knowledge, which is really God's knowledge of himself and of all things. That's the Sacra Doctrina, as understood by Aquinas.
Yeah, it reminds me of sometimes the way that the medieval cathedrals were described as almost like microcosms of the universe. They were like representations of the whole cosmos. There was a kind of splendor, grandeur, height, these sorts of elements.
Yes. Just to comment on that too, and with other temples of other religions, this has been something that's come out with the history of religion, study of different religions, that temples would be microcosms. And in the cathedral, what we have then is the microcosm with the Creator corporeally present in the center of it. That makes a huge difference. We have to remember all these, probably billions of human beings who preceded us and didn't have the advantage of the revelation of the God of Israel, He who is. And so we have to pray that they were, through these shadows and figures, able to find God and come to Him.
Right, yeah. So the cathedral then, in a way, is both brilliant and beautiful, spacious, ordered, organized, but also you can always find little, it's a never-ending kind of, you can go into any small,
corner,
small chapel in different areas or prayer things. But within it, you're right, what made it a cathedral, what made it these great thing was that, right, God himself was present in the sacrament.
Yeah.
Right? So through the liturgy of the church, human beings were restored in relationship to God because God, right, entered into that relationship with human beings in Christ.
Yes.
And then, through the church, the sacraments and scriptures. And what I also have in mind here is this idea that the cathedral was not limiting. It was kind of open. And I think in a certain way, and you can, let me know if you think this is a helpful way, is that an authentic curriculum, even though, say, in the beginning it was small and limited, handful of faculty, handful of students, was in a way open to the whole.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Right. And so when other disciplines later were added, they weren't doing violence to that, to that original kind of smallness, but they were the flowering kind of, the acorn growing into the oak.
Yes. Yes. And the students would be able to recognize whatever further, direction they wanted to go for their major, how the core was actually enabling them to not only step into that more, that professionally directed subject or area, or that it really was, as you say, a flowering forth. And
largely what you're summarizing here, the university actually articulated in its philosophy of the curriculum, which was developed by the faculty early on and continues to be the philosophy of our curriculum today. And it really is that idea that since all of reality comes from God, right, both in the natural order and in the supernatural order of revelation, that education and an authentic curriculum is, and in a way faculty and students have that recognition in a way that the ultimate reality is greater than
Yes.
their particular approaches to it.
Yes. We go to Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, where Paul says that the invisibles, the power and deity, especially of God, are manifest through the visibles he has made. Then, in some ways, anything and everything is a point where God is manifesting himself, literally because he's holding all these things in being. And so there's an integration that comes, and then, as you say, it just opens out to all things. You don't get lost in your major.
Yeah, so I think it's that idea of kind of like, sometimes I think we think of integrity as a kind of wholeness that can kind of limit or fix. It's almost like I think modernity sees integrity as a kind of prison from which freedom needs to break out.
Yes. Yeah.
But instead, the way you're describing integrity is a kind of wholeness into which we grow.
Yes.
Right. So it's the fullness of our nature. It's the fullness of our common life together, which we may never fully achieve in this life. Right. But that allows, so this integrity, the integration of learning.
Yes.
The integration of knowledge, the integration of the disciplines is actually a kind of fertile
Yes.
and open, because it accepts certain kind of ultimate truths.
Yes. Then there's a hierarchical order then.
Then we can explore
Yeah.
and we can encounter a kind of joy
Yes.
in learning, right? A joy in the truth, as John Paul II would describe it in Ex Corde Ecclesiae.
A beginning of that eternal beatitude for which he has made us and saved us.
Wow, that's really, really helpful. Tell us a little bit about your own study. How did you get interested in learning? How were you educated? How did you end up becoming a theologian? And maybe who were some of the teachers that influenced you along the way?
Yes. Well, I was in college in California, St. Mary's College, from 1966 to 1970. Put it briefly, it's a time when it was easy to be confused.
Wow.
And easy to be confused about many things. And I must say that Father Owen Carroll, who spent almost 45, 50 years at St. Mary's, he also taught at the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology in Berkeley with grad students, was a major influence. And I can't thank him enough. He has recently published a book that I would like to show to everyone, The Sufferings and Glory of Christ, a meditation on Holy Week. He also has a new book coming out on the 5 ways of Aquinas, which is really going to be quite extraordinary. But I met him at St. Mary's at a point when everybody was more or less saying, or most of the professors, not all, were saying that Aquinas and the ancients were passé, irrelevant, and Father Carroll.
So this is the late 60s in San Francisco.
Yeah, that area.
And
Bay Area.
Bay Area, I guess, Oakland or...
more closer to, let's say, the hills on the other side of, from Oakland.
Okay.
Extraordinarily beautiful area, by the way.
Yes. But kind of almost an epicenter of a lot of just, a collision of ideas and a lot of, like destabilization of classical forms of education and maybe classical forms of Christianity.
Yes. Yeah. Calling into question. And there were extraordinary number of theologians who got lost during that time, both American and Europeans and others. And I think were very sincere, but very mistaken in many ways. God bless them anyway. But I just think, so Father Carroll was able to show that the ancients, Aquinas and others, and he was also very well read in others like Kant, Hegel. He could discuss Descartes. He could discuss any of these people with any expert. But he was able to show us, a lot of times through examples and through going slowly through Aquinas' text, what Aquinas is really saying, not just what other people might be saying he's saying, that he was able to really unfold for us the richness of Aquinas' thinking, Augustine, Dionysius the Areopagite, and others more recent, of course, too. He's still alive at 91 92 years old now, and he has written this long work on the 5 ways of Aquinas, and he finished it when he was 91. So he's really an amazing man. He's still living in Oakland.
Now, how did his teaching, as you're describing it here, not teaching maybe merely texts or the history of theology or merely, I don't know, theological ideas, but you somehow helping students encounter the realities that are disclosed by these authors.
Yes.
How did that impact your own vocation as a teacher?
Well, as Aquinas says, that the mind should not stop at enunciables, that is, words. It must arrive at the res, the things themselves. And too much of theology seems to be caught up with memorizing of conceptual patterns rather than a real seeing of the actual beings. As Aquinas says, there's nothing in the intellect which is not first in the senses. So we've got to come to the sense corporeal beings. It's through the visibles that we come to the invisible perfections of God. And Father Carroll was so good with examples that he came up with. Just using examples from Aquinas, the archer shooting an arrow, all the implications of that for the 5th way, for example. Could you say more, just a word about that for listeners? The archer shooting the arrow. Yeah, right.
What's that an example of?
Well, actually, what Father Carroll does is he shows in the 5 ways that there is a kind of unity to them all, starting with the first moving being. We see all these moving beings, and then we see that the moving being gives to the moved being, let's say the archer to the arrow, a certain movement that has a certain character and directionality to it, that it's necessarily in flight now. The arrow cannot be otherwise as long as it is in flight. And it's sharing a certain perfection of movement that is a perfection first in God, who is the source of all perfections of all beings, who is governing the universe toward its target end, the new heavens and the new earth, the heavenly Jerusalem. So I hope that's answering your question, but it's just, he was able to show through the examples of Aquinas and others that he developed this, you're seeing the beings, you're not just bringing together concepts.
Yeah, it's really powerfully put, and it's a sense of education as helping people to come into contact with reality.
Yes, education as ex, from Latin, ex ducere, to lead out of what? Out of what? Out of the darkness of sin and ignorance in which we were born. And it's really, in some ways, like the exodus, from a Greek word, the way out of this shadows and darkness in which we this world lies because of our sins.
Yeah. And in order to have that kind of education so that we can maybe leave behind some of our misunderstandings, some of our, deceptive ways or misunderstandings about the world, we, through education, come into greater contact with reality. And what I hear you saying is that was something you first encountered in theology. As really the touchstone of true theology, and through Father Carroll and
others too.
And then,
and
then being able to read, say, Pseudo Dionysius or Augustine, Paul, John, as well as
the scriptures,
the scriptures, and of course Aquinas, seeing them as introducing us to, in a way, helping us to see the truth of the universe, and therefore through the truth of creation, the truth about the Creator, who not only comes to us through creation, but also comes to us through the incarnation. But that overall approach really opens itself up into actually a rich notion of education for any discipline, Because even say if you turn to biology, you're trying to look at the world as it truly is. And that when we discover DNA, when we discover principles of order within the universe, when we see things like the incredible complexity of the cell or different things like this, we're not simply imposing on reality a concept, or simply I don't know how to put it, some kind of mode of speech, but we're encountering truth.
Yes, right.
And right. And so therefore that same principle in a way that you took from your studies of theology opens itself up to a whole understanding of the university.
Yes, exactly. For Aquinas, again, the nothing in the intellect which isn't first in the sensible beings, and so it grounds you in the sensible, and then the intellect. That word comes from Latin intus legere, to read within. That is, let's say we're looking at something. It's a rock. That's one of Aquinas' favorite, a stone, lapidum, and we're looking at a stone, and we're making me looking at it and say, what is that over there? And it's present in the eye as that sensible image, impression. And then there's that natural desire to understand what is it, to understand, to get to the substance of the being. What is that? And let that which is there now be present in our mind in this other form. What's in the sensible and being now becomes present in our sense and into our intellect, and there's a real kind of identity or union with the known present now in the knower as well.
So education is helping people to come into that union with reality.
Exactly.
Right? And I think there you made a subtle distinction, and I'd like to come back and talk about this a little bit more. And I'd like also to ask you, when we get back from our break, to tell us a little bit more about some of the ways in which you would try to introduce students, to what Ave Maria was trying to do. But just real quickly, I think that in Descartes, in modern philosophy, you get an emphasis on thinking. He'll even describe man as a thinking thing. But thinking, in some ways, is thinking about something. It's the first step of the intellect. The second mode is understanding. It's moving from perceiving to the judgment that what I'm thinking is true. And that what you're kind of gently reminding us of from Aquinas is that Aquinas is never merely about thinking. Thinking or reasoning, as he will put it, sometimes ratio, as he will describe it, is a mode that springs from understanding, from intellectus.
Yes.
And issues in understanding,
yes.
Which is why I think sometimes, in our contemporary world of education, we have incredibly high levels of thinking that are phenomenal, right? We can, I think last Christmas we launched a telescope that orbits the sun.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. That's pretty impressive thinking.
Very.
Right. And yet at the same time, we find ourselves sometimes with a lack of understanding of what does it mean to be human.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And so anyways, I think that moving to that shift of understanding, education is about helping me understand reality.
Yes.
And therefore, I have been brought into contact with that reality by other teachers.
Yes.
And so as a teacher, I help to bring other students so that they can do that.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
It's really kind of an invitation.
Yes.
To see things. So let's we'll take a break and we'll come back shortly.
Fine.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. If you'd like to support our mission, we invite you to prayerfully consider joining our Annunciation Circle, a monthly giving program aimed at supporting our staff, faculty, and Catholic faith formation. You can visit us at avemaria.edu to learn more. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
Dr. Riordan, in the early days of Ave Maria, you served as Dean of the faculty, I think Associate Dean at some point.
For a short time.
And I remember you gave a wonderful talk to students and parents during orientation back in the early 2000s. Do you remember that talk? And
yes.
Would you what were a couple kind of key themes that you felt were helpful to kind of orient, to to help students understand the kind of education that you were so invested in passing on?
Yes. The intention of that talk was to help the students who had just read Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture.
Mm-hmm.
If I take a moment to talk about that book, it was published right after World War II by a German philosopher, Catholic, and he writes right in the beginning, people might say, what are you talking about leisure for? Our country is a mess. We've got to rebuild. We've got work to do. Mm-hmm. And he says, no, well, that's important, but we need to have this, develop this contemplative ability to see creation and creation's creator much more present and with us, so that we don't just build away. As the psalmist says, unless the Lord build the house, the laborers labor in vain.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
Joseph
think I remember
Pieper's,
in that book right? I think he contrasts. You can either have Homo sapiens or Homo faber.
Yeah,
right.
Yes.
Is it man the knower or man the builder?
Yeah,
right?
And the Tower of Babel would be an example of that kind of way in which the human race can, or any person in their private life can try to build themselves up so that people will notice. And that's, by the way, in the Genesis text, that we'll build something that everybody will notice. And it's always a dead end. And in that talk, then I tried to focus the students on the importance of their study, importance of letting what they're learning deeply inform them. That's a word that Aquinas will use, information. That is, what you're learning is actually forming itself in you and conforming you to the realities that you're seeing and learning about, and ultimately conforming you to the maker of these realities. There's a deification. There's a making us more and more like God. And this is the beginning of beatitude, when we will see God as He is, John says. And so I tried to emphasize the importance of the core, and then all the courses that would be taken in their major and so on, and also the life of prayer, that they would bring themselves, let the Lord bring them to worship. That was also very strong in Pieper, that the study and contemplation of reality should lead us in gratitude to God. Eucharist, giving thanks, and worship of God, who is made us in such a way that we can apprehend, take in, and become more and more familiar with Him through His creation and the greatness of His creation, and praise Him for it.
Now you're describing here a kind of vision of a whole education that would flower in worship.
Exactly.
This seems to contrast perhaps what some people might imagine a Catholic education is, which is kind of training or knowledge plus piety, as though kind of piety is good, perhaps, but is really separate from the education proper. So the classroom is one area, the chapel is another, but they're really separate. But tell us about how are these actually connected to one another? Because I think that sounds kind of strange.
Yes, there's a great word in Greek called cosmos. We use it in English too. It comes from the Greek word kosmin, which means the way that a woman adorns herself to beautify her, show her beauty. And
like our word cosmetics.
Yeah,
right, or
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cosmos.
Cosmetics, yes. And then you see that beauty, to be just trained in some field and then worshiping the Creator and not being attentive to creation in the multiple perspectives that the other subjects can provide for us. A panorama, a richness, is to miss an awful lot. There's also a good word in Latin, universe, universare, to turn together as one, that all things are coming forth from God, issuing from Him, being sustained in being, and aimed back toward Himself in the new heavens and new earth, the wedding feast of the Lamb. And to these other subjects, these liberal arts, enable us to see that richness. As we're preparing for the birth of the Lord, what a difference it is to be able to have some deep familiarity with history, be able to see what the significance of this birth really is for every human being from the first two onward, who God intends. He says God wants to save all men, as he says. First, I think it's 1 or 2 Timothy.
Yes.
So there's a richness that is not available if you just simply go for your profession and then piety. Piety is great, but it can be a richer piety, a deeper piety with the liberal arts.
So maybe if I had to summarize all of that in one word, it would be truth.
Right. Which, yes.
Truth is both one,
yes,
and also has an abundant richness,
yes,
that flowers forth in a million truths,
yes,
that all of which flow from and flow back to. So if our education is orienting us to reality, maybe first in the reality of the created world and of ourselves, then it naturally leads to an understanding of the source of that world,
yes,
in the Creator.
yes,
And having come to understand the Creator,
yes,
both through the world, but then also through his revelation, right? When I understand in a way the beauty and dignity of another person, I have to act in accordance,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
It wouldn't make sense to understand what another human being is and then not somehow honor
the image
that
of God
person.
in that person. Yeah,
So in the same way, to understand the truth about God, especially as revealed in Jesus Christ,
right. Because
must flow forth in a kind of honoring love and gratitude.
yes, exactly.
So there, it's the unity of truth
Yes.
that really unites, right, the classroom and the chapel.
Yeah. And Christ tells us that he is the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And he is that primal truth who is God in his fullness, knows first himself, the infinity of infinite perfections of his own essence. Then he expresses all of that in his one word, his Son, God from God, and then through the word speaks into existence all of the beings. Genesis, God spoke and it came to be. And so that same word is the one who is coming to restore and rescue what has been hurt and has been damaged and hurt through the fall. The richness, as you say, then, of cosmos, universe, being restored and saved is, I think, central to our understanding of the university. By the way, the university is a Catholic invention from the Middle Ages in Europe. They were the first to start these kinds of schools where you would have this variety of subjects, and with theology as a capstone, always issuing forth in praise, Eucharist, Mass. Aquinas was teaching when he was in Paris, actually in the Cathedral of Notre Dame while it was being built. So,
Wow.
Yeah, notice the reaction too of the French to when there was a big fire in Notre Dame Cathedral several years ago. They weren't going to let that thing just go. There was an enormous reaction that I think shows that there's a deep appreciation, a greater appreciation for God and his and what the church is at a subliminal level almost in Western society, and it's really hurting that we're not educating ourselves into it and restoring it and taking it further.
Yeah, so this is the larger vision,
Yes.
that you and the other faculty back when there were 4 of you,
Yes.
and then as it grew, right,
Yes.
from what single digits to double digits to 3 digits.
Yeah, and we had to restore
and growing over time.
And you took over as the dean after I had a short spell down here when we first arrived, and then Father Lamb came and Father Fessio.
Right, and I think it's that same sense, just as though this vision of the integrity of learning,
Yes.
and the unity of truth. It welcomes many new disciplines and it welcomes many new people.
Yes.
Right. It's not limited
Yes.
to
Yes.
The particulars because it's open to the whole.
To the whole. Exactly.
And, how did you? So I think this is just such a. It's so wonderful to kind of go back and walk through these days, because I think that sometimes when a university is established, sometimes people can maybe take for granted and don't realize what was kind of fought for, what was developed maybe slightly against the grain of the dominant trends in contemporary education of today, which tend to be either more technical or perhaps more focused on social change. But what I'd love to just shift gears for a moment is we've kind of looked at the beautiful vision. What were some things that you did as a teacher? Right, you were you're still emeritus professor with the university, but you taught for 20 years or more, and before that had taught for many years in
Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit.
So, just what were some things you did in the classroom that tried to, carry out this vision of education as helping the student and the professor, right, to conform to reality?
Yes. Examples. Father Carroll used many examples. Tearing paper, if any of their audience remember, or students here use that. That exercise was basically working out some implications from Plato's Parmenides, where we arrive at seeing that anything that is existing, any of the existing beings, are necessarily don't exist except in as much as they are issuing from and being held in existence by the One. Dionysius and others, Augustine and others, are able to take this Platonic developments, and through the descendants of Plato, develop that so that one sees that One is the Trinity. And we aren't existing right now holding this podcast, except that being is holding us in existence and all the equipment and everything else that's going on in the entire universe right now. And that exercise did make quite an impression, but it had to be done slowly and repeatedly. There were other examples too. I wanted to try to help the students to understand the divine ideas. That is, how God knows all the perfections of his essence and then chooses some of those perfections to be participated by creatures. And so he has these divine ideas. And so I spoke to them about, I'd play a piece of music by Mozart and then ask them, aren't you hearing the interior of Mozart's mind when he conceived this melody? You see, this piano concerto number 21 or whatever, second movement is a particularly beautiful one. And the inaudible figures, ideas there, coming out audibly into the air and then into you, so that those same figures and forms can be inside your mind, that were in Mozart's and were his joy. That's through the medium of the sound, then there's this communication of the inaudible through the audible into us. That's what God is doing with all the things that he's making.
So when we listen to music,
yes,
right, we're listening to the interior of
composer.
Another person.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? How is another person able to communicate that interior life to us through sounds?
Yes.
Either instrumental or through words.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that what's going on between us? Is we even converse with each other in some way.
And it's one of those things we take so for granted that we often don't realize the mystery of it.
Yes,
kind
exactly.
of, right? The wonder that we can communicate ideas, we can communicate stories,
yes,
we can communicate like a whole history of emotions with music. And if we can do that through our spoken sounds,
yes,
right, or play, through instruments or through our voice, then, right, in some ways, that's what God is doing.
Yes,
through we learn not only in Genesis that God said, "Let there be light." Right, he spoke,
and it came to be.
But I know you often would talk to students about the beginning of John in a way when John retells the story of creation, right, in the beginning.
Yes,
but now through the incarnate Word. Could you say a word about that? About how, about how this sense of God speaking?
Yeah. Yes. The beginning of John's gospel, so very important. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What came to be was life in him. Now that divine life, that's in the Word is the divine essence, which the Father speaks forth eternally, and then he speaks through that Word the creatures into existence. And both Augustine and Aquinas take that reading of the text, what came to be, creatures, was life in him, his living divine essence. There's a communication of life that's going on. The things that are coming into being, whether they're alive or not, they're still in some ways expressing the interior life of God and his perfections. And then that one became and then he became flesh. And so the one who is dwelling forever in the bosom of the Father, as John says at the end of that prologue, he has made the Father known in such a way that we're not only able to say there is a first being and a cause of all, but that first being is the Blessed Trinity, ever with the Holy Spirit proceeding as that mutual love of each other. The Father
and how
Son.
beautiful that there's no competition.
Yeah, exactly.
In the way that you describe it there's not a competition between God's presence as the creator in having created all that is created through his word and his eternal word.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So that God and the creature are not in competition with one another. And that also means that creation in its created goodness is not in competition with one another.
Exactly.
Right. So that there is a fundamental original harmony. Right. In some ways, I think we can think about this spokenness.
Yes.
If God creates through the word, some people like Tolkien and Lewis have thought about that as God creates through song.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so God creates a fundamental harmony.
Yeah.
So we, of course, experience much disharmony. We experience sin, confusion, right? Death, destruction, betrayal, all sorts of these things.
Yes.
But that's in a way secondary.
Yes.
That's not original. There's the original goodness, and then there's the corruption by sin, and then God enters into that sin in order to somehow heal it.
Yes.
Right. Ultimately through the resurrection.
Yes. Yes. So he's not about to let his very good creation, as he calls it in Genesis, just linger and fall away.
And that also means one of the things I think that when we listen to or when we talk about, say, Aquinas' proofs for the existence of God from looking at the cosmos, we forget that we ourselves are part of the cosmos.
That's right.
So when we think about God loving created things, it doesn't just mean he loves the world outside of us, but it means he loves us.
Yes.
We are one of those things
Yes.
that God, as you put it, certain perfections he chose to bring into being.
Yes. Yes.
We, right, and this is personal, right? You and I are among those things.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Each listener is among those things, those realities that God has loved and willed and brought into being.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
With a purpose.
Yes.
The world is not an accident. We're not accidents.
That's right. No, all very, very much intended, providentially ordered. And as Augustine and Aquinas following say, God does not allow any evil in this world that he cannot make even greater good out of it. Wow. And there's a lot going on in Ukraine. There's a lot going on in many parts of the world. But we don't see what tremendous acts people are performing in which they are meriting eternal life right now. Here in Florida, we had a terrible Hurricane Ian. It really wiped out a lot of people's homes and so on. And but you'd follow on the news, people doing things, saying things. They're just extraordinary works of grace going on. I'm not recommending that we look for hurricanes, but it's just he's at work. He's at work.
Reading somebody
in him we live and move and have our being. So
and that this is right. Christ and Paul show that the glory will be revealed, but it will come about somehow through hardship, suffering. So therefore, the fact that we cannot avoid or outthink or escape death and difficulties need not rob us of hope.
Yes.
Right, because Christ has triumphed. Now, I did want to just mention one thing, and then I want to ask you a few questions as we conclude. But one is, I think so many students know of you as a teacher who I think threw himself into teaching as much as anyone really has. And I know you don't like to, hear the attention, but I think the university recently named a faculty excellence award after Dr. Bill Riordan, and I think that kind of shows the impact, and I think the encouragement that many of us find in wanting to become better teachers, and I think that many of our students. But you were also a scholar, and this book on Divine Light, the Theology of Denis the Areopagite, Dionysius, published by Ignatius Press, was a real wonderful gift as well, and I think shows that genuine teaching comes out of that conformity, almost that kind of consecration, and Excordia will speak about this, as we consecrate ourselves to the truth. And so I just wanted to thank you for your work on that.
Yeah. Also,
well.
if I can mention another book that was published by the university's Sapientia Press here on the mystical theology of Dionysius the Areopagite. It was his treatise on prayer, which was taken and still is considered one of the greatest works on prayer. Aquinas in the Secundae, question 180, follows Dionysius very carefully in his discussion of contemplation. And that book is
that's right. What's the title of that book?
The Mystical Theology of Dionysius the Areopagite. And
the actual mystical theology, the text is only, 10, 15 pages?
That's right, yeah.
And it's wonderful. You wrote a whole book, both introducing it and then translating it and unpacking it.
Yeah.
Right? We often do need to read great works. We often, right, we're human. We also need teachers. And I think, your book in some ways is an encapsulation of your teaching.
Well, I hope so. But I hope the teaching was what it should have been, and I hope the book was. But what I did is I tried to do the Greek on one side and a facing page translation in English, and then commentary. So
yes, and that book can be found with Sapientia Press, which is sold through Catholic University America Press. So just 3 quick questions towards the end.
Okay.
What's a spiritual practice that you do every day to help you find meaning and purpose?
I usually do the Divine Office with my wife in the morning, if we can get it in. Sometimes we don't. And evening, Divine Office. Daily Mass, at least of some sort. We're not quite as mobile as we used to be, so sometimes we do it on EWTN. And then, as much as possible, being sitting in adoration. That's really a big help. My wife is a tremendous companion and friend and beautiful lady, and we do a lot of time in prayer together. So
that's beautiful. Another question: what's a book you're reading?
I'm reading right now a book that's still still being edited. It's The 5 Ways of Aquinas by Father Owen Carroll. I think it's an extraordinary analysis of the 5 ways. I think bringing out the significance of the 5 ways for the movement of the entire Summa. Because, in the first part, you have the discussion of God, and then creation, and then the second part, man, as being moved toward God, third part, Christ, as our way to God. The 5 ways, he's able to show that the 5 ways are somehow undergirding the entire work. It is going to be a marvelous, and it's going to be published by Albertus Magnus Press. President is Stephen Courtwright, former professor of philosophy at St. Mary's, and another young man named John Johnson, who is very much the sort of demiurge and worker to try to bring the press to fullness.
Well, it's wonderful to see that you continue to really have that deep passion for learning, and that idea that I guess it's not surprising that the 5 ways of showing God would be connected to Christ, who, as Aquinas says, is our way.
Yeah, that's right.
God.
Exactly.
So,
that's it.
And then finally, what's one false belief that you held about God? And what was the truth you discovered?
Which one? In the undergraduate years, I was very mistaken and confused at times about God. And at a certain point, I think I probably didn't believe that there was a God, and more and more convinced that there was. And then it was a journey to find more and more back my way to the Catholic truth, with Christ as the one true teacher and all of us as learners. But yeah, there's always God is always drawing us back. At every moment, He's at work.
Wow. Well, Bill, thank you so much for being with us today. And it's such a joy to kind of walk back through the early days of Ave Maria Institute College and now university.
Yes.
And to really remind ourselves and to remember that founding and continuing vision that really orients the university, right, as a Catholic university, that engages and draws in all sorts of different modes of study, but with an overall purpose, with a sense that they do somehow, in a small way, help to restore a little bit of the order and the harmony that God originally sang in His universe. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast. If you like this episode, please rate and review it on your favorite podcast app to help others find the show. And if you want to take the next step, please consider joining our Annunciation Circle so we can continue to bring you more free content. We'll see you next time on the Catholic Theology Show.